Spark encapsulates our passion for exploring the vast unknown of unvoiced thoughts and ideas.
If you could bring somebody back from the dead, would you? Or if you could keep somebody alive forever, would you? That's what vampires do. And storytellers. We give eternal life to people through stories. My grandmother was an independent woman. She was an organic farmer before it was a thing. She raised 2 daughters. She went back to school and became a lab technician when she was in her 40s. We shared our love of books and stories. But there was one story she couldn't share because she didn't know it. And it was about her mother, Maddie. Maddie was from Arkansas. She was 19 years old when she met a man from Texas. He was a military man. They moved to Texas. About a year later, she gave birth to my grandmother. About a year after that, she was gone. She left. Why did Maddie leave? We don't know. My mom did meet Maddie once when she was young. They were at a restaurant in Los Angeles, and Maddie had a parrot on her shoulder. And I was always fascinated by this image of a woman who had abandoned her daughter, meeting her granddaughters for the first time, and she had a parrot on her shoulder. I have a picture of Maddie that sits on my desk. And on the back of it, she sent it to my grandmother when she was about 10. And on the back of it, she wrote, "So Thelma will see how ugly her mama is." Why did Maddie leave? Why did Maddie feel she was ugly? A relative told Maddie to stop trying to connect with her daughter, and we lost her story. A story of a young girl who was married to an older man, who had been married before, and who would go on to have at least 3 more marriages. Why did Maddie leave? Women back then weren't really asked their story. They're not really asked their story today. I've been in plenty of rooms where nobody asks what I do, what I'm interested in. I mean, has that happened to any of you? I mean, it's weird, right? When I was little, I was encouraged by my grandmother to read. I lived in stories. I used to take stacks of books from the library. I watched tons of movies about interesting women. I was looking for a path, someone to show me how to do the things that I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to act and write books. I was a big dreamer, and I was going to have a big story. I was going to have as many marriages as Elizabeth Taylor, 8. I was going to drink martinis all day long like Joan Crawford, smoke like Betty Davis. And then I realized I didn't want lung cancer, I didn't want to be an alcoholic, and I certainly didn't want to remember the names of 8 husbands. Besides, I was interested in women we didn't hear so much about. I was interested in the Maddies of the world, the naughty woman, the scandalous woman, the rebellious woman. Women marginalized, stigmatized, dismissed because of their race, their class, what they did for a living, or simply the choices they made. Why did Maddie leave? Why did Maddie feel ugly? I felt compelled to bring these women out of the shadows. So I wrote books and made documentaries about these kind of women. And when I talk about them, they live. And a little piece of them will live in each one of you today. I wanted to know, how did a runaway girl climb into a cage with a tiger? How did a pair of conjoined twin sisters band together by a piece of flesh become the biggest stars of their day? Where did the women of burlesque come from? Women dancing 52 weeks out of the year, supporting themselves and their families during the Great Depression, when most of the country was out of work. So I had these great ideas for documentaries, and I ran around Hollywood pitching them. I'm still pitching great ideas. And I kept hearing no. All the executives I talked to, and they were all men at the time, they all thought these stories had no relevance. I kept hearing, no, 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 no. And I thought, I know. I KNOW that these stories are great. And I KNOW that other people will like them. And I KNOW that I'll show you. So I didn't wait for permission to tell these stories. I needed to interview dozens of elderly women before they died, and we lost their stories. So I just did it. And my films have won numerous awards. They've been on Netflix, they've been on Showtime. My books have all been on bestseller lists. I persevered because I believed in the power of these women and that their stories mattered, their struggles would shine a light for others, that they were the trailblazers. Like Mabel Stark, ostensibly the world's first female tiger trainer. Her story was lost, dismissed, because she worked with animals in cages, which we don't really do today. But in her day, she loved these animals. She gave her life to these animals. I thought her courage would inspire me, would inspire others. How did a normal girl go into a cage with tigers, 12 tigers? Then there was Daisy and Violet Hilton, considered freaks because of this band of flesh that bound them together. They were the biggest stars of their day in vaudeville in the 20s, and if you don't know what vaudeville was, it was like a variety show on stage. They literally made bags of money, but they never saw any of it. Their legal guardians kept them locked up, imprisoned. Eventually, they fought for their freedom and won. I thought their story would inspire that even though the dark days, they believed in themselves. They knew they had worth. They did not consider themselves freaks in a freak show. And there was Beverly Arlene. She was a dancer with horrible rheumatoid arthritis, so she always wore her gloves when she performed. One night, she didn't get her gloves on in time, and a customer complained that he had to look at a cripple. She was fired. She was devastated. She persevered. She became, if not the first, one of the first female theatrical agents in New York City. She had never told her story before. In fact, dozens of the women that I interviewed had never been asked. Like Maddie, why did she leave? Why did she think she was ugly? And why did no one find out? I recently had lunch with a 90-year-old friend who's in my first film about burlesque, which is quite misunderstood. Rita, she thanked me for the stacks of fan mail she gets today because I told her story. Young women writing her, telling her that she was their inspiration. These women went through hardships with the odds stacked against them, and they made worthwhile lives. Now, I realized with storytelling comes responsibility. Not just to tell the truth, and not to be like a vampire sucking their stories out and leaving so. I sat on the phone with them. I drove them to doctor's appointments. I sat on the deathbed of one former acrobat, 90-year-old Mimi, as she mourned the death of her partner of 60 years, Thurene. Mimi could still kick her leg over her head. Another responsibility I felt was to pass on what I was learning. I'd never had a mentor to show me how to do things. I wanted to help other young women tell the stories that they wanted to tell. I wanted to help women find a voice, as I had through telling other stories. So I went to my friend Roger Durling, who runs the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and I said, what do you think about this idea? Professional female authors mentoring the next generation of female storytellers. I'll call it Stories Matter. He said, it's a great idea. The educational arm of the festival will support you. And so now, a couple years later, dozens of women across the country have gone through this program. They meet with New York Times bestselling authors, poets, screenwriters, and they learn to tell the stories they want, and they learn to write. And at the end of the session, they're all published in Entity magazine, which also co-sponsors my program. And the women have written incredible stories about their grandmothers, their mothers, artists, female pirates, whatever they want that will inspire. I'm Leslie Zemeckis, and I'm a storyteller, and I believe in the power of women's stories. And I encourage all storytellers to seek the hard story, the untold story, Maddie's story. Thank you.